This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Chinese Communist authorities stepped up efforts today to sell their story. That everybody in China is okay, everything in China is under control, Beijing is certainly back to normal. As part of that, they ordered 2 American journalists out of the country. They are 2 of the many who've been telling a different story of a government on a ruthless campaign to hoodwink and terrify its own people. Correspondent Bob Simon begins our China coverage.
The authorities tried to silence the voice of America in China today, expelling its Beijing bureau chief. For good measure, they also kicked out an Associated Press reporter. Both men were given 72 hours to leave the country.
I would imagine that part of their purpose in expelling someone is to make everybody else nervous and try to get them to do less than what they're doing, and I'm sure that it will not have that effect.
The effect being sought by the regime was back to business. To that end, it put its tanks in Tiananmen Square under wraps, and on television tonight, trotted out some American businessmen who'd returned to Beijing. The authorities are jump-starting the economy, forcing just about all of Beijing back to life, except the universities, the defeated enemy camps. The army never bothered to invade the campuses. It didn't have to. Resistance was gone. Students were gone, thousands of them, knowing that the government had plans for their re-education. It's already begun for 2 of the 21 student leaders on last night's televised Most Wanted list. They were arrested today. In a sequence which recalled Germany in the 30s, Chinese television tonight showed 22-year-old physics student Zhou Fangsuo in custody and said he'd been turned in by his sister. 24-year-old law student Xiang Yan was also arrested. He'd been one of the students at that meeting on May 19th with Prime Minister Li Peng. Outspoken then, out of circulation now. At Beijing Teachers College, a leftover wreath marks the spot where student leader Wu Kaishi inspired a rebellious crowd. He is still at large tonight. So is another leader who has not lost hope.
We still have faith to the pro-democracy movement. The leaders still have faith.
But for many, the only faith, the only hope lies outside China. The American Embassy's visa section opened today for the first time since the killings. By dawn, there were a couple of hundred people in line. It was somehow faintly reminiscent of the American Embassy in Saigon the last months of that war. Time running out. People who believe their lives depend on a good place in line. That relations between the U.S. and China could be broken any day. When can we go in, they all ask, fearing the answer will be, as it is for many, come back tomorrow. Patrols pass by now and then, as they do all over Beijing, just a reminder. But the last word today may have come from another capital. In Oslo, Chai Lin, the one-time commander of Tiananmen Square, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize as a symbol of the democratic movement in China. Bob Simon, CBS News, Beijing.
From the beginning, China's movement for democracy and freedom was not just confined to Beijing, and neither is the current backlash. Chengdu, the capital of China's most populous province, is also under martial law. And Shanghai, the business capital, has plunged into a depression, both financial and psychological. Correspondent Richard Wagner begins our report.
The fighting has stopped in Chengdu, the only city in China other than Beijing under martial law. The day after the massacre in Tiananmen Square, thousands of students took to the streets here and burned a police station, the Central Market, and other buildings. Chengdu, the major city in southwest China, has always been at odds with the leadership in Beijing. Behind a huge statue of Mao Zedong, the authorities have stored the hulks of buses burned by the rebellious students. At the city's principal university, students say as many as 300 of their classmates were killed in the brief but vicious violence. 22-year-old medical student Liu Wensheng is dying. He was shot and beaten by soldiers as he joined the protest against the brutality in Beijing. Most of the students have left the campus. The few who remained were reluctant to talk to us, but one who did, when asked why he stayed, said, well, it's not safe at home either. Another said he thinks that democracy will one day come to China, but that it will take at least 50 years. The authorities are claiming only a handful of people all across China were killed in the uprising, but the young people of Chengdu are not buying what they call the big lie. The government has begun a re-education process here behind closed doors and on public posters. Young children are being forced into the so-called youth police. Here in the heart of the province, which gave birth to Deng Xiaoping, the iron fist of Beijing is once again in firm control. But its grip was briefly shaken, and that moment will not be forgotten. Richard Wagner, CBS News, Chengdu.
There's a desperate effort in Shanghai now to suspend reality, to convince residents and foreigners alike in this industrial center that nothing's changed here. Just look at the tranquility on the streets and listen to the sounds of the cranes, the construction cranes, carving out a new skyline, proving that the business of Shanghai is still business. Why, say China's deal makers, should those rumored events in Beijing make a difference?
To them, this is you just roll with the tumultuous events and get back on track.
But foreign confidence has been derailed by the Tiananmen Square massacre. $250 million of pending U.S. investments alone have been lost in Shanghai, according to diplomatic sources. Future deals set back years, and most American managers of joint venture factories are gone, fled at the height of the unrest. The authorities are even trying to shut down the few satellite receivers that bring Western TV news to international hotels, for fear the information could reach the general public.
Inside China, in Shanghai, the government is winning the propaganda war. But the student protest leaders who've gone underground are not giving up, have served chilling notice they will not suspend the reality of Tiananmen Square.
At the last major anti-government demonstration here in Shanghai, two students who had fled Beijing nervously approached a British reporter, showed him the blood-caked shirt of a slain colleague and the pictures he'd been taking. They asked the reporter to make sure the outside world saw the truth.
They see that the Chinese people are beginning to accept the official version of events, or inclined to it, and they desperately want to redress the balance.
The two students, a boy and a girl, were being hunted by the police. It's not known what's happened to them. But in China these days, one has to suspend reality to believe the outcome will be good. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Shanghai.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News. Terrence Smith on a shortfall for House Democrats about the minimum wage, and Betsy Aaron, a wet weather phenomenon that has New England buzzing. Major developments tonight in the battle over policy, politics, ethics, and economics between President George Bush and Democrats in Congress. President Bush's veto of an increase in the national minimum wage will stand. As expected, House Democrats failed to get the two-thirds majority needed for an override of the president's veto. The vote came just hours after House Democrats completed their new leadership lineup today. Joining new House Speaker Thomas Foley, the Democrats this day chose former presidential candidate Richard Gephardt of Missouri to be the new majority leader and William Gray of Pennsylvania to be majority whip. These House leadership changes made necessary by the resignations of House Speaker Jim Wright and Whip Tony Coelho. Resignations coming amid the negative campaign attacks and ethics warfare in Washington. Correspondent Terrence Smith has more now on the focus of the latest battle, the minimum wage.
The new Democratic leadership had barely reached the chamber when it confronted its first challenge, an uphill battle to override President Bush's veto of a bill raising the minimum wage to $4.55 an hour. The debate revealed sharply differing views of the merits of the bill.
We're talking about giving people some dignity. We're talking about letting them have a standard of living that's better than they can get if they work on welfare.
The reality is that 65% of the people in the minimum wage today are single, work part-time, most of them are teenagers, and most of them are going to school. We are not dealing with helping the low-income heads of household with the minimum wage anymore.
The sad fact is that in communities such as mine, the minimum wage is the maximum wage.
Speakers on both sides of the aisle contended that the real issue was a test of wills between the Democrat-led Congress and the president.
Today's exercise is not about helping the working poor. It's about politics, pure and simple.
And that's what it came down to in the end. With the votes falling largely on party lines, the Democratic effort to override the veto failed 247 to 178. 37 votes short of the two-thirds needed. Minutes after the vote, Senate Democrats reintroduced the exact same bill.
The president should understand that this is an issue where Congress has only just begun to fight.
Republicans also moved to introduce their own bill, a modestly increased minimum wage combined with tax credits for the poor. So the stage is set for a struggle between the Democratic-led Congress and the White House that could last all summer. Terrence Smith, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
A double debut blast-off for the U.S. military in space today. A new generation surveillance satellite launched aboard the newest heavy payload rocket in the fleet, the Titan IV. This latest U.S. move into space is also a move away from reliance on the civilian space shuttle for launching military payloads. The Queen of England today awarded former President Ronald Reagan the highest honor Britain can bestow on a foreigner. She named him an honorary Knight Grand Cross of the Most Honorable Order of the Bath. Mr. Reagan called it a splendid tribute to the two countries' special relationship. Thousands of West Germans gave Mikhail Gorbachev a hero's welcome again today as he visited the industrial city of Stuttgart. On the third day of his West German tour, Gorbachev got a taste of the Western high technology that he's seeking to help revive the Soviet economy. And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith. Tomorrow, the new leaders talk about trying to end congressional cannibalism. Also, beating the summer blues and the official Elvises on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Sunday on CBS Sports.
I'm Morley Safer, CBS News.